Welcome to our first in the summer series of Founders Unfiltered. My name is Freddie Coffey. I'm the Director of Digital Marketing at Jumpstart. I'm very happy to welcome you to Limelight today. Limelight is going to be our partner in this summer series for the next 3 months, starting tonight with Dallas Hogensen, and then in July and in August as well. And so we're taking advantage of this awesome space, the beautiful couches, and the amazing views for networking and happy hour after the event. I want to, before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, thank you to Food for Thought, who is our caterer. They've got the food set up in the back. They'll be back there afterwards as well. If you need to use the restroom at any point while you're in this building, not like at any point ever, but while you're here, it is down the hall and the second little inlet, and through the under the exit sign. So figure that out. But that's what you'll need to do. We are here today for our main event, which is Founders Unfiltered in real life with Dallas Hogensen of Felux. I'm going to read his bio. I don't normally like looking down and reading this, but I want to. It's impressive, so I want to make sure that that I do this right. So Dallas Hogensen is the co-founder and CEO of Felux, a B2B marketplace and supply chain platform for the steel industry. In the last 12 months, Dallas and his team have built, launched, and scaled Felux to more than $500 million in platform sales and raised $24 million in funding from top global investors, including the founders of Uber and Groupon. Prior to co-founding Felux, Dallas spent a decade building and scaling companies as a revenue leader and co-founder in San Francisco, New York, Denver, and Europe, including as the co-founder and president of Signal HQ, a sales and data company acquired in 2019 by Bombora. Did I say that right? Yep. Excellent. I'm off to a great start. And as VP of Commercial and Corporate Sales for Lyft, where he helped build out and scale Lyft's business platform. Now, Dallas is on a mission to hashtag make steel sexy. We're going to find out about that in a little bit, but first, please welcome Dallas Hogensen to Founders Unfiltered.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Take it away. I'm just going to listen. You have $500 million in platform sales. So.
Where do we start? But first off, Freddie, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure and a privilege for me to be here. Being new to Cleveland and having the experience to get involved with the community and be a part of this event, something I care deeply about. So I'm glad to be up here with you.
Well, we're certainly glad to have you. I've been really fortunate over the last year that we've been doing these webcasts and now doing the live events to talk to some founders with really unique entrepreneurial journeys and some weird stories on how they got to be where they are now. You're no different from some of the conversations that we've had and what I've learned about you. Can you walk us through, your path from where you started to Felux co-founder and CEO?
Yeah, absolutely. I think everybody has a unique journey in their own right, and they develop that narrative around themselves that contributes to what they're building and what they're doing, and it really shapes the future of the team and the company. And I think this is no different, really. And mine started a long time ago. I'm actually not from Cleveland. Like I said, I came here just about a year ago today. I originally grew up in the country in Bend, Oregon, and I've grown up on the West Coast predominantly for most of my life. Went to school out there. And like you said, I've lived between both coasts in the middle of the country and in Europe for some time. But my journey started on a ranch, right? And so I think a lot of the spirit that I embody today actually is embodied from those experiences that I had where, and obviously I've got my cowboy boots on today.
I'm glad you said that because I was going to call it out. When you said ranch.
It's usually no shoes or cowboy boots. Ask anybody in our office. And so they put up with me, which is nice at this point. But I think what the reason why I mention that is that for me, growing up on a ranch is everything you do is hard, right? You wake up early, you have chores, you have to accomplish tasks. And the idea of just action is an important element of an entrepreneur. And I think a huge part to my story is that no matter the weather, no matter the environment, the circumstance, you have to get it done. And I think that was instilled in me in a very young age. And also my father had spent his entire career in finance, and so I think I was lucky to have this element of always thinking about macro conditions and what was happening, but also not being afraid to just do the work. And so, early in my career, I had kind of one mission, and it was actually very simple. I wanted to be an athlete. I wanted to play professional football. My father did. I didn't get the height. He's like 6'5", 250, and everybody still thinks I'm like the mailman kid at this point, which is yet to be determined, I think, at this point. And so, my path really started then when I was about 9 or 10, really focusing on all the elements there. And I made quite a bit of progress there. And I played football in college for a couple years and ended up having several knee surgeries. And I'll never forget my doctor's like, I've seen better knees in a nursing home, is like exactly what he told me. And so I really knew at that point, after my second year of playing, that it was time to think about what's next in life. And originally for me, it was building a career in finance. I was fascinated about hedge funds and using leverage to create opportunity. But before we get there, I think what's really important, I think why the narrative here is so applicable today of why I landed up in building companies, was that as an athlete, there's a really important behavior that happens. There's a few things. Is you have a collective team that is on a clear mission to do something together. And more importantly, which I think is what I take away and install in our teams today, is that I was doing 100 repetitions a day, watching those 100 repetitions. Very minute feedback loops that were created, I think taught me at an early age that failure is a part of everything that you expect to do, but it's also your job to take that discipline and responsibility to evaluate that, learn from that, but not be afraid from it. And so what ended up happening, and the story around this is, I think, changed my life, really, is I stopped playing football. I ended up traveling the world for about, almost a year, playing poker with my friend who's a professional poker player. He speaks 7 languages, so we traveled to several continents. We surfed all over the world, and he was making, every game he was playing with hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time, and he was 20, I was 21 at the time. And so
we can all identify with that, right?
And it was one of those unique experiences that was like, I think poker is an incredible sport activity that everybody should learn how to play, because it creates positioning and leverage. It teaches you about taking risk. It teaches you about evaluating your opponents, doubling down on opportunity, and making sure you get your money in at the right time. And I think that really applies to business. And so I was just never good enough to do it full time, and really all my friends still do it today professionally. And so it's really been fun to see how them today currently are all in Las Vegas playing in the World Series. But I took more traditional path. I went back to school. He continued writing one of the most successful poker books ever, and it was a coach that was getting $5,000 an hour to coach. And so, all of those lessons early on told me that, if you find a need in pain, there's money associated with that as well. And it taught me a lot of business principles early on. So I felt very lucky to have a group that pushed me forward early on and gave me unique life experience and got me out of my comfort zone, because Chris, my co-founder, is sitting there right now, I think I make him uncomfortable daily at this point. And I think it's a big ethos of what we do and drive to be successful. And you talk about the stats that you read off earlier. We're not excited about that yet, which I think is the exciting part. But anyway, so I had an opportunity after I got done playing football in college. I started a fraternity. There was a defunct fraternity on campus. I found out about that. I contacted the national chapter. And honestly, I was a little bit depressed. I was lonely. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have anything to do. It was the first time in my life that it happened. And so this fraternity had been kicked off campus. It had a beautiful home that was just sitting there empty. They had a lot sitting next to it. And so I talked to these guys, hey, let me rebuild this thing. And so I found out that there was some developer interest for the property next door. I sold off the property. I used that funding to refurnish and build the house. And in our first year, and I knew nothing about a fraternity, by the way. I was like, I've seen them on TV, and mostly it's pretty bad, right? And I was like, I don't want to be that. And so I was like, how do we do this differently? And so the national chapter said, great, okay, we'll bring in a couple guys, we'll help you build it. And honestly, this was a mechanism for me to make friends, right, at this point. And so I went to every sorority that was at school, and I said, hey, listen, who are the 5 people that you know admire that are not involved in a fraternity today. I'd love to meet them and talk to them about the vision that we're building here. And so immediately I was able to establish trust with a lot of the people who were going to make us successful. And so I didn't have to do any recruiting. I just had to do convincing on why what we were going to do was different and how we were going to approach it was going to be different. And in that first year, we recruited 70 people, and we broke every record and won every award on campus as a fraternity. And to this day, I still don't know what I'm doing or what I did there. But we'll talk about this probably later, but this idea of being really intentional about designing a culture that had a standard of outcome that we believed was appropriate for that environment was a huge part of our success. And now this was 2008, I think. So even now today, like, it's still running strong, and it's something I'm really proud of. So jumping into the business world, I mean, I think all of those important patterns in my life shaped me to probably the day-to-day environment that we have today. So anyways, I left school, started my role in finance, was working on the fund of about $500 million under management, small group, and really my job was to think about alpha-driven strategies for that group and look at new opportunities. And this was 2010-ish, and really a bad time to be in finance in general, and just in the world. Like, we're coming off one of the worst periods historically. People were very scared about everything. We're kind of going into that period now, but different circumstances then. And this, to me, was a really enlightening period for me, because I had the chance now to get paid for studying 10 to 12 hours a day about what companies were doing, what were future companies doing. I was really looking for young companies that were doing interesting things that we could go invest in. And what I realized very quickly was, oh shit, I am an operator, I'm not an investor. Like, the actual act of building, to me, like, gets me up in the morning. The ability to bet on one thing and give it everything you got is an exhilarating concept. It's frightening as hell. But I didn't want to be the one that was going to bet on 50 ponies, right? I was like, if I'm going to do something, we're going to build conviction, we're going to learn, we're going to fail, and we're going to grow. And so I left my job, I left my girlfriend, got rid of my car, house, and I packed up a single bag and I moved to San Francisco, and I shared a bed with actually the officiant of my wedding. And he at that time was starting his own business out of a magic jack in his wall. I sold him a computer for $50. And today he's got one of the largest digital ad agencies that still exists today. And so we would lay in bed. We called it the cloud, because like cloud computing was starting to become a hot topic at that point. And we would talk until 3 a.m. every night about business. And that was actually the transition for me to get down to Silicon Valley. And this was 2012, I believe, so almost exactly 10 years ago. And what's interesting to understand about this and like how my decision, like how my career progressed, and I know there's a lot to this story, I think it's important to like the future part of this narrative, is that the decision I make in the company I work for was actually called Rocket Lawyer. I bet everybody's heard of LegalZoom. I've seen the commercials, really a competitor in that space. So why I chose to work there, number one, I'd never done sales before, and I wanted to learn how to sell. I also didn't want to do enterprise sales. I wanted to do transactional sales. I wanted to make 100 phone calls a day to people who had strong emotional pain, where I could learn how to connect instantly, drive to a decision, and move them forward in the process. Because my thought process here was, if I can do that, I can get better so much faster than doing 20 deals a year, where I can do 20 deals a day, right? And so the people who founded the company, one was a co-founder of LinkedIn, one was one of the lawyers that took Yahoo public. And so the decision for me was, can I make 100 phone calls? Can I work for people who are really smart, who've built iconic companies? And can I build myself a network from there that would launch my ability to build companies? And so I would get there, I would take the 509 bus every morning to downtown San Francisco. I would open the doors to the office, I'd make coffee, I would make calls that went to the East Coast. I would hit quota before anybody came into the office. And every day at lunch, I would get on LinkedIn and say, hey, listen, I see you're building this company. We're doing it this way. I'd love to pick your brain and understand how you did this, how you thought about this. And so in about 7 months, I went from never sold anything to breaking every record in the company, to building a network of some of the best executives in Silicon Valley, and then obviously to my first VP job.
So was that practice of doing that, was that intentional? Yeah. Or was that just like an innate curiosity that you had about building that skill set? Or were you, because I feel like whether or not you knew it or were intentional about it, you were cultivating all the hallmarks of a successful startup founder through, athletic training and that sort of thing. A lot of the time you train to failure becomes a natural part of things. Failure is certainly intentional, sometimes in gambling as well.
100%.
And then you start, you go out to the West Coast and you start with these Silicon Valley tech firms and stuff like that. So were you building all of those skills, and with the fraternity too? That was essentially just a startup you weren't getting paid for. Were you doing all that on purpose?
Hindsight, I'd like to say it was intentional. But I think that where it was the element of creating the luck is I kind of knew that I had the grit to go do that. I knew that I had a strong framework for making decisions and evaluating decisions. And I think that came from those experiences. But, the reality was, I just didn't know anything. I knew that if I worked harder, if I made connections, I asked good questions, it could lead to something that would, in the future, maybe more exciting for me. And I was really committed to doing that. And was able to be successful very quickly. And I don't think anybody else was doing that work to do that, really. And so that allowed me to have that opportunity. Because one of the senior executives at Salesforce became my mentor very quickly. And opened a lot of doors for me where I didn't have a resume, I didn't have tenure, I didn't have experience, where people trusted me as a human being, that I would follow up, I would do the work, and I would put in the time to make sure that we were going to be successful no matter what.
So at this point, you're out on the West Coast and you're hustling into the office early, and you're learning, sales and that sort of thing. Tell us a little bit about how your experience is working for and founding startups prepared you to lead Felux.
Yeah, I think specifically there's a few things. I was lucky enough to be a part of the Y Combinator network, which is globally probably one of the most successful accelerators that exist today. And a lot of the iconic companies that we know, i.e. Stripe, Airbnb, all of them have really gone through the doors of Y Combinator and Paul Graham. And so the items that were tested there were they were backdated, they were tested, right? They were proven ideas that could help you accelerate how quickly you were able to get to market with your business. And so early on, I was given, I think, really good frameworks for making decisions. And so two things that have stuck with me today is Paul Graham, who founded it, he kind of always talks about being a cockroach. So you always have to survive. No matter what you do at early stage, you have to survive. With time, you can create opportunity. So that always stuck with me. And so being absolutely paranoid about everything, I think is actually a good thing for a founder. And then number two was this idea of creating feedback loops. And here's why I actually think the distilled success of my career comes down to this very specific thing. And even today at Felux, by the time my competitor does one thing, I've done 100. And so my job as a leader in an organization or a founder of a company is to create frameworks and systems for our team to move and do those actions. We are going to know faster. We are going to fail faster. We are going to get data points back faster. And we're going to make decisions faster because of that. And the reason why that's important, where a lot of people think early on that you have to be perfect. That's not the case. You have to be prolific. You have to move fast. And that actually allows you to build just enough, what your customers want, and not build these large monolithic architectures or systems that could take years to develop where nobody uses. And so I think going through that experience, the two things that resonate most with me that I act on a daily basis today are those two frameworks for decisions.
And this isn't your first time running a company. Yep. I mentioned when I read your bio earlier about Signal HQ, which was acquired. Was acquisition there or in previous startups? Was acquisition your primary goal, when growing that business, or how did that guide your decisions as a founder, and does it still?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's an interesting retrospective on Signal HQ. When we started that, I was really tired and I was burnt out. I'd been sprinting for 8 years. And the concept of the business is that it was built based on the largest problem all of my reps had over the previous 8 years. And it's a really simple thing. Of all the companies that I actually could sell to, which one's actually interested in buying what I'm selling? And so what we did, which was very unique, and we bootstrapped the entire company, and it was built as a lifestyle business with 3 of us, actually, and we were profitable almost from day one, is we were looking at several billion different data points a day, which was around intent data. And we could tell you in your CRM of all the companies that you have, which ones are actively searching for you, competitors, or keywords that they might be looking for your services. But also the secret sauce to what I had about 1 million companies that I was tracking at any given time. So I had a full understanding of almost every company in the United States of who exactly from those companies was searching for what. And so we built one of the most interesting technologies that would actually show you, and I could usually get to the person who was searching on the keywords that related to your business. And so one of our first customers was a Fortune 500 customer. And this was 3 of us who bootstrapped and stringed it together. And so this is this idea of like, before we raised any money, we put, I think, $70,000 of our own money into it just to get like the basic core principles of the technology started, and making sure we were also using some other people's data. So we had to pay for that pass-through cost. But the idea was to bootstrap it, build a lifestyle business. Like I said, I was really tired. And we were in Denver. We were looking for just like, hey, how do we live like a comfortable, good life? Now, the other part of the story that's like less told is understanding like how you pick partners and the belief systems and setting clear areas of responsibility and how that can change. And if it changed, what happens? And so ultimately, like, ended what happening is that I think we just, as like a team and partnership, we just didn't get along, and like in the crossover between responsibilities and like the clear areas of ownership, like one person thought this, another, and it ended up making the decision easy to sell the business, is because we actually solved the problem that this other company was trying to do for 10 years, and we did it in 3 months, and they're kind of like, oh shit, okay, like, like come on board, and I actually decided not to stay in the acquisition, so I could go work on the next thing, but probably one of the most important lessons I ever learned in my career was from that. Founder dating is tough, right? Chris and I, who's sitting right here, who's been one of my favorite people ever to work with, we didn't meet for the first year building the company. I was remote in Denver. Chris was here in Cleveland. I hadn't been to Cleveland ever before the first day I set foot here last year. And so like building that foundation of trust is like a whole different game changer. And like I think the alignment of skills that Chris and I have are just have been like created this incredible partnership. So like that learning to me, I think has really changed me and maybe mellowed me out a little bit, and maybe dropped some of the ego as well.
So let's switch gears to your T-shirt. Chris's T-shirt. Make steel sexy. Let's talk about Felux. What is the pain point? I mean, it's a complex industry. We see steel mills right over there. We see anybody that pays attention is down by the flats or anything. We see these freighters coming in with taconite on them, and they're taking it in there, and the smokestacks and everything, there's stuff going on. It's being shipped back out. Beyond that, not a lot of knowledge, I guess, of that industry. What's the pain point that you're working to solve, and kind of paint a picture of us of the current steel supply chain?
Yeah, I think I never thought I'd be talking about steel in my entire life, honestly.
That's why everybody's here.
Yeah. But I think I found something that's worth 30 years of my life and time. And so I think this problem's really important. And let me give you a little context on this market. It's a $3 trillion global market. Chop off about $1 trillion of that, which is really isolated to China. But outside of that, it's one of the largest industrial markets in the world. Also, too, to give you some more context, B2B commerce is actually 100 times larger than consumer commerce. Yet, most of those transactions today happen offline, are paper-based, and really live in their own siloed data sets. And so I think why that's really important to understand here today is what you see is a steel company on the surface, but we're actually a data company. And the problem that we're solving is the digitization. So right now what we are doing is we are helping the entire steel supply chain digitize every element of the supply chain. And why that's important is, like, one, is it's really hard to do. For 100 years, these companies have operated in silos, still have on-prem, really mainframes, really on the supply side. And so therefore, the reason why this has never been solved and this pain has never been solved is that distribution has stayed between relationships because nobody could get their inventory online. And the pain of finding, sourcing, and procuring new customers and relationships actually becomes very difficult because you have no information on each side of the supply chain. Therefore, you can't establish trust quickly. You can't establish credit reliability quickly. And that takes months and sometimes years to build those relationships. And so ultimately what we're doing and why I think we're so excited about the future here is we are doing something that nobody has really ever tried to accomplish, is build a global taxonomy of all the language and inventory that exists on this planet. Today, city by city, state by state, region by region, company by company, they all can describe the same material differently. And so there's no common language to transact digitally. And so the first step and pain that we're solving is allowing each side of the supply chain to get their inventory and information online so they can start making perfect decisions in an extremely opaque market. As a manufacturer, you don't have access to pricing. You're beholden to really a supplier telling you what inventory they have. And most of the market indices that exist today are lagging indices. There's no real-time information. We know the stock market as essentially perfect information, right? In real time, we're getting information that allows you to act. Here, that's not the case. And so the vision of our company is to, step one, digitize. Step two, build the commerce layer. Step three, really build the largest data graph in the world of the connected supply chain. We want to own every transaction between every supplier and buyer that exists on this planet because we have the standard of taxonomy and nomenclature for it to exist and to pass through. That's really what we're doing here.
So around 500 million in transactions on the platform to date. But you mentioned you're not even close to satisfied with that.
Yeah.
That's a big number. How can you guys hope to maintain and continue to grow?
I mean, realistically, we grew 4,500% last year, so that is not realistic. But actually, I think this is even a really interesting segue to, and we'll talk about this, but a segue into like current market conditions and how that affects our decision making and priority around quality of revenue efficiency versus top line growth. So, I mean, we think we'll cross about $1 billion in GMV through the platform this year, and the goal is to own the majority of that market globally. And like I think we can easily be 30, 50, $100 billion of transactions annually in the next decade. And I think we will do that, just given like we're the only ones doing the hard work to make that a reality. Now, what I was talking about earlier is really interesting in how we even think about the business today and how our mindset has changed in the last 5 months, in the last 2 years, is that for the last 13 years, we've had an extreme bull market. I mean, interest rates have been extremely low. Capital has been cheap. And Silicon Valley actually has done a couple things that I think are kind of bad in reality for businesses. You got every 25-year-old founder going there to start all these crazy businesses, raising $25 to $50 to $100 million. But the expectation is that you spend it because the next round of capital will be there. I mean, I think even Jumpstart recently raised their last fund at the end of the year again because every firm was doing that, right? Capital was cheap. Capital was being deployed. And what I learned from Lyft, this is very interesting, and we're seeing it play out in the public markets today on this idea of pro-consumer businesses, right? Is that at Lyft, we subsidized so much to drive action. We gave coupons to all of our riders. Uber has done that as well. DoorDash, like you can get one item delivered to you for nothing. That's insane. Like we know that's not sustainable, even though network effects create great power. And so what has kind of really been this really interesting 13-year period that's really being corrected heavily in the last 5 months, and we'll see that probably over the next couple of years, is that all of these businesses were expected to grow top line. And there really wasn't any requirement for revenue. I mean, one of my best friends was the COO at Bolt, and they were the fastest growing company of all time, and they're doing nothing. Like, it's crazy. And so why I say that and why that's important to this question is that we were doing everything we can around top-line acquisition for 2 years. We were moving incredibly fast to figure out what market segments that we could acquire that would build network effects for us cheaply and do the work for us, because marketplaces really become interesting when you are first, you're biggest, and you create network effects. However, the world now is changing. They expect you to build real businesses. In the last 5 months, the average Series A went from 20 to 10 million, right? Unless you have great quality of revenue, so great margins, 70 to 85%. You have kind of like these minimum thresholds for each level. Like, you're not going to get fundraising anymore like you could. And so as a business, we have really focused 90% of the team now to build quality revenue. And so we work with the largest manufacturers in the world, like Tesla, Schneider, GE, that are making, important products to the world, but they're also, paying us real substantial SaaS revenue versus focus on getting the next person on supply chain that's going to do 2 or 3 transactions that month. It's not the same quality of revenue. And so we've really shifted our mindset as a company for the next kind of 2 years to make sure foundationally all the elements of our good business are there, and that we're not subsidizing our growth in this kind of pro-consumer model.
So I would say that Cleveland and a lot of Midwestern cities are historically home to real businesses.
100%, yeah.
Why is Felux making Cleveland its home, other than your professed admiration for Chris?
Yeah. This actually gets me really excited. And I'm still learning about the history and really enjoying it. But I think that there's very few times, maybe ever, I know in my life and career, where I'll have an opportunity to do this, is Cleveland is really the heartbeat of where the Industrial Revolution started. Think about this. The first ever specific steel furnace was created here, which actually built the growth of Western expansion. Outside of that, the previous one was in like Pennsylvania and the Bessemer process and things like that, but the steel specific one was here that allowed this company to grow. Like, how amazing is that? Also, the first billion-dollar company was ever created out of Cleveland when J.P. Morgan and Carnegie merged to build U.S. Steel. The foundation of the industrial world is derived from probably Millionaire's Row and Euclid, just out these doors. I mean, when I drove over here today from our office, I crossed Steel Road just out there. And for me, that was like kind of a special moment. I didn't know that road was there. But I was like, holy shit, like, how often do we get to actually build a business that's going to affect a supply chain that basically supplies everything that we do? So on average, just to get context, it's about 600, I think, pounds or so of steel for every person in the United States that's made a year. But if you actually look around this room for a second, there's probably 200 to 300 products that you're in an arm's reach of that started with steel and aluminum. And the fact that we are one of the only companies in the world that is challenging a century of norms is incredibly motivating. And I don't think there'd be any other place we would want this company to be from. And that's why my wife, my son, my family, we moved here without ever stepping foot in Ohio. The story was too important.
Well, welcome. It's a great place.
Thank you. So far, so good.
Let's talk about. We've got a lot of founders here tonight, and one of the most important things to building your company is fundraising. So let's talk about that a little bit. First of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
On your recent $19 million Series A fundraising round. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think what's exciting too, and I don't know if this is true, but based on like the facts I saw from PitchBook and Crunchbase, is I think we actually had the largest round raised in Q1 in Cleveland. And I think it makes us 8th overall is venture-backed companies here in Cleveland. In the span of 10 months, something like Chris and I are very proud of, that we get to, hopefully be a steward of for other companies to come. I will say the fundraising process is really interesting. I mean, really for me, I'll go back to, this really started in February of 2000, what is it, 22 now, 21, when we were raising our seed. Number one, it's really hard to convince people when you're building a steel company, like, why the fuck that matters, especially venture capitalists. They're like, steel, I don't get it, I don't care, not in our thesis, we're out. And the reason why I say that is, I had to learn very quickly I had to put the framework of what they evaluated businesses in, regardless of whether it was steel or not, and present that opportunity and why our approach actually built a really interesting competitive moat for the first time in history. And I had to start beginning the storytelling elements almost 15 months ago, really. And that all led to our ability to effectively fundraise, this year. And so I actually went back and looked at this today because I was curious. My target list was 128 venture capital firms that were Series A, Series B, multi-stage crossover funds. Because really, for us, we think it's going to be $300 to $600 million in capital in the next 4 years or so that are required to do kind of like the next two phases of the business, some of the international expansion, and probably a much larger growth check after that. And so, really early on for me, like my decision criteria was like, can they facilitate? Do they have enough dry powder? How much follow-on did they actually have? And what's interesting about fundraising for anyone who has done it or not done it is a very interesting game that's secretive on purpose. There's a set of rules, and I actually got a coach. So he was one of the old executives and like founders of 500 startups. So he's seen thousands of pitches and evaluated thousands of companies. And so when I went to the market, and like I said, I went back and I looked at 128 companies that were on my target list. I did 0 cold outreach. Very important here. Part of the rules of fundraising in Silicon Valley and on the coast is that if you reach out to them, like you've missed the first screening process. Like usually you need an introduction from someone that they know and trust. And so I got 128 introductions done for me and 0 cold outreach. And so I could go directly to the managing partner, directly to one of the partners and skip the whole associate process. Incredibly important for people who understand that process. Also, too, the timing and rallying of 100 different firms at once is really hard. I end up having 101 meetings in 3 weeks to get everybody to a data room that was open, to a term sheet decision period, to a decision in that 3-week period. And so, I mean, and the hard part, too, about a founder, it's your job as a CEO. Like, you're the only one that can be doing it. I mean, I sat in my basement taking calls. And every Zoom call that I had was actually in my basement. It's an unfinished basement, and behind me is a punching bag. And like, honestly, every investor loved it. They're like, this is the coolest setup ever. I can't believe you're in your basement. That's so awesome. Like, steel, like, yeah. And like, I think it was refreshing for them, for me to come in and say, like, this is where we are right now. Like, this is who we are. And, but it's, from a fundraising perspective, like there's a clear set of rules. And I think that, investing in and having a coach really allowed me, I think, to be a fairly good fundraiser. And I think, but part of the success of this business is actually me being a professional fundraiser. It's going to take a lot of capital to really go do what we want to go do over the next 10 to 30 years here. And so why I kind of give you those stats is I knew most of them were going to say no. But what I had to go do was paint a picture of the future, because right now about 30% of my time, and less now that we close around, is continually being active and talking to, the Bessemers, the Iconics, the Andreessens, the largest investors, and pulling them along with me, giving them updates, getting them engaged. And what I became very good at, which was actually key for me to evaluate who I wanted to work with, is every single person I would make them do work for me. It was a huge set of my criteria. I was like, if you want to be a part of this, I need this, this, and this from you. And like, so let me understand how you can help. Because I just didn't want institutional capital. I wanted capital that could accelerate our business.
You've given a couple nuggets of advice there. One, talking about working with a coach
Yeah.
in that fundraising round and being selective.
two.
And if you other than a couple of those things, if you had to give one more for somebody, especially a nugget of advice for somebody that's interested, that hasn't fundraised at all, and they're raising their first round, whether seed round, or maybe somebody that's going into their Series A, what would you say?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll give one universal piece of advice. Is actually really simple. Prepare. We prepared for 3 months. It's an intensive process. Number 2 is make sure your first 20 to 30 pitches are with people you do not care about, because they're gonna go wrong. You're gonna redo your deck 100 times.
Practice.
So don't get to the good ones first. Trust me on this one, because when it matters, you want to be sharp. And what the early ones allow you to do, they give you feedback. And so then you go build that next slide. Oh, they asked me this question. So I had a running list of questions that I would get every meeting. And I would use Otter to basically transcribe every single meeting that I did, $99 for the year. You put it on Zoom, and they capture every single word that's said. And so I would go back after that, and I would listen. I'd go, oh, I remember they said this. Let me go get word for word what they asked. And we kind of build this repository of questions, and Chris and I would talk about it. Or we would build the material that had to so when someone else came, it's well, this is how we do that, obviously, right? But they really the practice of fundraising actually gets you, and the preparation, just like a board meeting, gets you better at understanding your business and prioritizing what's the most important thing. And so, universal piece of advice: prepare, practice. Don't do it in a vacuum. Do not do it alone, because the best advice, the best feedback you get is when you just start sending it to everybody, talking to everybody about it, and you listen. The other thing is, at this stage, what is really important is you're building a seed stage company, is have a product. You cannot go pitch a deck anymore. Get something into market, whether you're using a low-code app, get 20 customers that are going to agree to what you're doing, prove that you have somebody using your product. You're going to have a really hard time. Actually, one other thing, too, is practice asking for lots of money. Don't be afraid. If you come in and you don't understand how much you need, what your plan is, and what the valuation is going to be, you lose your credibility. And so be very tight on what that is, because they know the answer. They have all their market comps. And so you have to do that research, talk to people, ask, well, if I'm building this company in this sector, who are my competitors? What are the comparables? Who did they raise from? What are those comps that they had? And it's because you don't want to come and say, I'm raising 100 million at $1 billion. I've got an idea. You're going to be laughed out of the room. Or even if I'm raising 500,000 at 20 million, they're going to say, okay, let me see the product and the revenue to prove that, right? And if you don't have that, and if you're making that up, you're done. And that word spreads because they all talk. That's what I found out. Every single one of them knows each other. And if they like you, but they're not a good fit, they'll be you need to talk to these 5 people. And so for me, that was a really successful element of building my network, is that they did all the work for us, which allowed us to be much successful, much quicker. Where our competitor took 6 months to fundraise, we did it in 3 weeks.
It's pretty impressive.
Yeah. Thank you.
I want to make sure that we have some time for audience questions. Yeah. Before I do that, I have to ask you about something that you're really passionate about at Felux, and that's your company culture. Yeah. You've built companies on both coasts, so you've experienced culture in different areas, and now being here. How do you build an excellent startup culture, and why is that so important to you?
Yeah, I'm going to start with a number. 756. I want everybody to remember this number. 756. So why this number is important is that Harvard Business Review did a study over 10 years on all things comparable within companies. Is over a 10-year period, companies that had a good culture outperformed that cohort by 756%. So when we talk about culture today, culture actually equals performance. Culture is very intentional, and we design it in a very specific way. I have a very clear 10-step plan of when I came in, took over the business, and how we reinstitute the culture that we want to design. And I think there's a couple things that some tactical takeaways here that I think are important for people to understand. The idea of culture, everything we know is mission, vision, values, right? The world, like the things that you get in your packet day one when you show up to work. We stand for this, right? We believe in this. Now, like those are important elements, and you should have those. You should have clarity about the standards and how you act, the focus that you have as a company. But it's actually a little bit medieval when you think about that as an approach to defining your culture. Culture is actually a very specifically designed thing, and it's done in a very specific way. And I'll tell you how I think about it. Is what we are trying to do is ultimately build safety, okay? And so if we think about natural human instincts, is that when we feel safe, what do? We're comfortable, we're vulnerable, and together we work. And so everything that we do, and all the companies that I've been a part of and founded, and even it's no different here, is I very intentionally build environments that create vulnerability. As soon as we break down those barriers, we start to see safety. And if I'm great at what my job is to really do, which is communicate the direction, the story, then it's very easy for our team to follow that and trust each other. And so we really start with a plan to force that function. And so we make people uncomfortable. We get them to share life stories, tell them about themselves. We make them fail together, because that's when vulnerability happens, and that's when safety and unity is created. And a real good culture actually is not like the words on the wall in the company, but it's when a team can move together, act on decisions and trust with little information to the direction that we're going. And so, it's something I could talk for 2 or 3 hours about, but like the core basics of what we design intentionally are creating and manufacture these not experiments, but experiences that create vulnerability. And I think what I'm most proud of today is we've had, I think, 4 or 5 people come to us and say, I hope this is the last place I work, right? And, we have 80% of our company still 5 months in. And so, like, it's something that we've excelled at, and also we've done some bad things too. Like, I think we have over leveraged human experience design and employee experience. And right now, actually, this phase of the business requires some grittiness, some toughness. And so we're going to see like how we rethink about that design as a team and how that affects the focus today. But I think the more important thing today is that as a founder or as a leader of a team, your job is to create an identity that people get behind, because we all have identities in our life, from where we're from, the work we do, the relationships we have, the areas we spend our time in. It shapes us as human beings, and it's no different in an organization. And as leaders, your job is to be incredibly intentional. And if you lose that ability to do that, the company itself takes a shape of its own, and you lose the ability to move fast, have standards, have intention, and shape the identity that you believe is right for the company at that life cycle or stage.
Dallas, I want to thank you for talking with me, with all of us today. This has been a real treat from my chair. Speaking of treats, we've come to my favorite part of Founders Unfiltered, which is our Fast 5 questions, which is actually 6 questions. Okay. You have to answer 5 of them. If you answer all 6, though, you win an imaginary prize. And this month's imaginary prize, in honor of you, is the original thing that made steel sexy, which is going to be a digital version of Hugh Jackman's Real Steel from 2011. I'll
incredible.
I'll figure out how to get that to you. Your Movies Anywhere app or something.
Yeah.
All right. So question number 1: if you could be the CEO of one of the most famous Silicon Valley tech companies, which would it be?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I think it might be Flexport.
All right.
Yeah.
And these are going to jump all over the place. There's no theme to these at all. What is your favorite Cleveland restaurant?
The Last Page.
All right. Yeah. What's your least favorite startup buzzword and why?
Oh, man, that's a funny question. This is a really interesting question. maybe like growth hack.
Nice.
Yeah, a lot of growth hack out there.
What are you reading right now?
Currently, actually, Amp It Up, Frank Sluthman, CEO of Snowflake, credible leader in wartime. I think really interesting insights, 90-page book. I recommend everybody read it. Really good around purpose, around tempo, and building a business that is super aggressive when everybody else is being cautious.
Say the title of that one more time.
It's called Amp It Up. Frank Sluthman, he's the CEO. He took over the CEO of Snowflake a handful of years ago, took it public.
Awesome. What is the riskiest thing you've done outside of business?
Oh, man. That's a good question. I spent 3 months climbing in the mountains in Peru.
All right.
Yeah.
Last one. You're going to answer all 6.
Great.
I'm
excited. I want this video, and I don't know how I'm going to play it, but I do want this video.
Last question. Where can I get a Make Steel Sexy t-shirt?
Well, I'm going to give you this one real quick. No. Actually, I did think about you. You actually got our last one in this run. So
Yes.
I hope you're an extra small.
All right.
Yep.
Well, hey. I'll squeeze into it. Or I'm going to flip this for sale after the no. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I would love to give you guys the opportunity to ask some questions to Dallas. We'll obviously have time after this for some networking back out on the patio, and you can have conversations then as well. But now's the perfect time. Vicky's going to be coming around with a microphone so we can hear you. So just throw your hand up and way back there.
I hope the mic works.
I feel horrible for making you walk over back. Hey, great conversation. Quick question. Like, if you're going to build something, you're going to need steel, right? That's obvious. Even if you don't want steel, you're going to need steel. But to those that might be in a business where the client or the ideal target prospect doesn't know they need something, what's your recommendations on that? So, like, I'm in the business insurance world. Nobody wakes up like, oh, I need a buy-sell agreement or key man, right? It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Like, don't even register. I don't even know the keywords that you would think for a business owner. So, like, or anybody in here that's doing something that people don't know they need, but they need, any ideas or thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so really the question is, how do we get people to understand what you're selling, why it's important? I think, do you want steel specific or more of like, how do we help convince? I think I heard it was kind of tough to hear on that side one, but yeah. So I think as a salesperson my entire career, there's a couple of elements that are really important. Is part of our job is to paint the future of why, clearly, like why we exist and why we're solving something that you might never have thought about. So in our industry specifically, most of the people don't know they need something new. They've been doing it via spreadsheet, fax machine, paper check, text message forever. And so everybody in our organization is really good at storytelling. Let me paint a future vision for you and why that's important and how that can change. And so I think what we are in a phase right now as a company is we understand that not everybody's going to be ready now. But we put enough wood in the fire that there will be people ready today and tomorrow and the next day. And so I think as a team, what we really become excellent at, and I think this was a question, so I apologize if I'm missing the mark because I couldn't hear all of it, but was early on, everything is about painting the future with your clients that don't know. And it's something we spend a lot of time thinking about. So we're storytellers first because you might not need it today, but you damn well are going to think about us when that next decision time comes because you're going to know why we're different than everything you've ever done in the past. And I think that's part of our superpower as a company as well.
So you're not just describing the pain point and how you can solve it. You're also going that step further into how much better life will be once it's solved.
Yeah, I mean, at Lyft, for the first 6 months, it took us 6 months to win our first client without a product. And so we had to go paint a new vision of the future for these large organizations because they had corporate travel that was run off spreadsheets. It's the same thing here, is that, well, hey, if we do this, well, you actually have trust and safety. You can see where your employees are, right? You can actually account for better cost mechanisms. Hey, we can give you predictive lanes and save you money from those taxi rides to the airports. I can build in a price for that lane. So, when you're thinking about how do you establish that program, we're going to show you what the future is going to look like and why that's important. And everything early on as an entrepreneur is about that mechanism. You're painting a new way the world should work. And a lot of people don't know you or care about you, and most never will. But the one thing I know we've done well as a company is people know who we are now. And we're the Make Steel Sexy guys. Like, it's hysterical. The story behind that's really funny. We'll talk about another day, but yeah.
More questions? Right here.
Thank you. Your 756 number is my nugget to take home tonight. I'm going to use it. But my question is, coming from a background where I've been working with a lot of people in the SaaS space, I have a software background, and now I'm in manufacturing and hard tech. How do you sell culture to startups to realize the importance of that early on?
Oh man, that's a really good question. I don't think I would use like the word sell. It's intentional. And the reason why I say that is you can't hide behind it. As a leader, as an employee, as the office, or the way you do things. And so people are going to sniff out the bullshit, and they're going to find out. There's enough information out there that if you're selling this element of culture, well, is it authentic? And so when I think about that is like we have, I have a 10-step document that is clearly articulated and laid out on what every phase of culture means to us and why we're in that phase and what's it going to accomplish. And so I don't think it's a mistake that we've developed a culture where there's trust, there's vulnerability, and then my job is to think about building a great environment for people to be safe in their work environment and like fun. And so I'll give you one nugget here that I think is important. In our industry, it's suits, it's steak dinners, and it's golf. I told my team at the last conference, if you wear a suit, you're fired. Like, you're wearing a Make Steel Sexy t-shirt. We have matching outfits. We're giving away socks. We're giving away t-shirts. We gave like 330 t-shirts away last year. And everything that we have a neon sign that says Make Sexy, right? Everything that we do is to be different. And we live up to that ethos as a culture. And so I think that is more interesting to like the selling question is you think about how the rest of your industry or the industries perceive what you're doing. The heartbeat is actually to come internally, but also it's important to think about how externally people talk about you when you're not there. And we are unapologetic about being different. 40% of our company today is minority or female. That is non-existent in the steel world where it's mostly old white guys, to be honest. And so we push that narrative. And so when people think about us, they come up to us and say, you're the fun crew. And they don't really understand what we do. So I think that's culture. That's how you sell culture. Everybody wants to come work for us. Like, actually, here's a really interesting dynamic. I think Nick is here, is on our team. Nick comes from the steel industry. He was replaced by someone who was 67 in the job. And like we're seeing right now is that our industry is okay with staying that way. And they're not doing the work to change, to sell and present something that's different. And that's why we're getting thousands of applications a week. And like we're not really hiring too much right now. We don't look at them, but like we're seeing everybody say, what you're doing is different. So I think we're selling it by believing in our convictions and creating the identity. It's been intentional. Yeah.
Other questions?
Great question.
Hardik.
Dallas, knowing what you know now about the business, if there was one thing you would do differently, what would that be?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I think so early in the business life cycle, actually two things I think are important is because I didn't know enough in the beginning, I think that I was influenced by some of the industry practices. And as soon as I got over the confidence to not care and actually do the things the way we're going to do them changed everything, right? We made a decision to scrap the original product, rebuild it, and that was really scary. But I think what I would have done differently, Hardik, in the beginning is that the thesis I had was digitizing supply. And I don't think I listened enough in the beginning to what our customers were actually saying. And that was like, we're not ready. We're good. We're making more money than we ever have. And so I think I probably could have alleviated 6 months of pain and like understanding where our core product market fit actually belongs, which is on the manufacturing side. That could have wasted headache. And so I think looking hindsight, it taught me a really important lesson that like listen to your customers and like don't, if they're not ready, like they're probably not ready at that point, especially in an industry that's not adapt to change. So looking back, that and being tighter about hiring, establishing better processes early on, making sure that the clarity of the mission and the role was more defined and less ambiguous, and probably not overhiring quickly. So a lot of things, actually, to be honest. But I think we overhired too quickly in the beginning. We changed so much. We had loose definitions on actual responsibilities, and systematically that actually causes a lot of pain. Because if it's not clear on the outcome or ownership that you have as an executive or as an employee, well, what happens? You actually have time to think, and that's when politics come in play. So we actually intentionally trying to design systems today that fill your day and that are hard to do, so you don't have all this time to think and wonder. And looking back, hindsight, like, yeah, obviously, but like in the moment, like I think we made some bad decisions, and as we were learning to figure that out.
Any others? I'm going to come over here, Vicky. You can. All right.
All right, thank you. So, three-part question. Is that okay?
Sure.
All
Got it.
What's your North Star metric right now? Why? And how do you guys come up with that?
Yeah, so the question was, what's our North Star metric? This actually changed based on some of the things I talked about today. So GMV, which is gross merchandise value, so that's the amount of product that's pushed through our platform, right? We are a marketplace ultimately, and so we're facilitating the movement of goods, buy and sold. And so what we were tracking is GMV, and what was really interesting, like we talked about earlier, is we've done over 570 or something million or something like that of GMV, which actually puts us in the category of one of the top marketplaces in North America already. And as soon as we kind of cross that billion-dollar threshold, like globally, like we'll be up there. However, we were subsidizing the cost of that for growth, and it made sense in 2021 about until November, because we were doing every decision we made was to grow top line. All our OKRs, all our planning, all our decisions were a facilitation of speed and growth and building both sides of the marketplace. Why? Because that's how you raised money, and that's what the market dictated. However, that's actually changed. We don't necessarily care as much about GMV at all right now because it's not a quality revenue metric. And so everybody in the company, there's 90% of the company that's aligned to quality revenue. And in order not to be aligned to ARR or subscription-based revenue, we had to have a very set of clear requirements that what you were doing was incredibly important and it tied to some future revenue generating activity. So right now we have essentially 3 engineers that are building our steel graph that is basically scraping every company on the planet and digitizing really what they do, their capabilities, where they're located, and the flow of goods that come in and out of their locations. We have a logistics and services team that we're growing rapidly and providing a lot of success. However, if you look at public markets, that trades at service revenue. And so it's not a quality revenue. So everything, like, we were not afraid to change our North Star metric, and we did it very quickly because we knew that in order to survive and build the foundation, we always have to be ready to focus on the most important thing. And this market dictates you build a good business. That's just the facts. And so everything is around quality of revenue now. And we have a 12-month plan from small sliver to big sliver on how we do that.
I know that there's probably a few more questions out there. I want to encourage you to ask Dallas during the networking because there is food and drink back there that Jumpstart paid for, and I want to make sure that we all get some. So how about a round of applause for Dallas Hogensen for joining us tonight? Again, Dallas, I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys having me. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. I know.
I want to encourage everybody to return next month in this same spot. We're going to be talking. Well, I'm going to have you stand up right now. You're not coming up on my screen over here, so I can't have your face in two spots at once. Oh, there you were. Wait, there we go. Okay. I had Dallas in two spots at once. I have DJ in two spots at once now. So DJ Hudson from Limitless Minds is going to be our guest on Founders Unfiltered here at Limelight next month. The registration is open on Jumpstart's website right now, and if you're subscribed to our newsletters and that kind of thing, we're going to hammer you with promotion for it over the next month. So I hope you guys all come back and join us for that. It's going to be an excellent conversation there as well. And that is it for tonight. Stick around for some networking. We've got a number of Jumpstart staff members here. I'll have all of them raise their hands. We like to do that. So if you're from Jumpstart, there we go. If you have questions about Jumpstart and what we can do for your startup, make sure you chat with them. Questions for Dallas. Let's all go out on the patio and enjoy this nice Cleveland weather, which you're getting to enjoy Cleveland summer for really the first time.
It's about
so
time.
I'm
It's
excited
about time.
about that.
Yeah.
Thank you
winter.
so much, guys, for coming.
Thank you.